Hello, I have returned. So over my lunch break the other day, I thought to myself, I never really thought about looking into the reasons why nations of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries chose the colors for their uniforms, for their national colors on the battlefield. So I just plugged it into Google and I got a bunch of Google AI responses, and I was like, this would actually make a pretty interesting video. Now, this is going to be more or less an informal, fun, hey, did you know kind of video, so don't expect any kind of official, authoritative sources everywhere like my last history video was. Because I'm tired and just wanted to put out something that was light, fresh, and interesting. And sometimes writing out sources can be really bothersome and painful, and I can't be bothered right now. So, so let's start. British red is possibly one of the most famous colors from this time period, colors associated with an army. So, British red has its origins, for the most part, it has its origins in the English Civil War with Oliver Cromwell, when he redesigned the parliamentarian forces. He chose red as the standard appearance, and apparently it was largely for economical reasons. The red dye comes from, excuse me, go back that up, comes from rose madder, which apparently was readily available in England. It gives off a really nice red dye, as you can see here. So, that's pretty much the reason why the British wore red. It was easy to obtain. It was cheap, easy to obtain. And this is going to be a recurring theme that you in this video. Armies were expensive. You dressed them up in whatever was the cheapest option for the most part. The French wore white. Now, it's not really that complicated. While, as according to here, in this website here, Fort Ticonderoga, while it may not seem like it, unbleached white wool cloth, often described as gris blanc, costs less than dyed cloth, especially on the vast scale of the French army. There was expense inherent in dyeing wool to make the distinctive colors of regiments. So effectively, the French did not dye their uniforms at all. Wool being white, the French simply didn't dye their uniforms at all. And it was convenient because, according to my quick little search I did over lunch the other day, white was the royal color of the Bourbons. So it just made sense, and it was a really cheap it was the cheapest option, really. So it's really not that complicated. That's where French white comes from. Now, the Spanish wore white. Now, my Google searches from the other day made this interesting observation, but apparently, and it's true, the Spanish are depicted as wearing yellow, oftentimes, in pop culture. Not the case. They wore white. And if you want just to take this AI overview over here at face value, because I tried to look for something that was a little bit more authoritative, and I didn't really see anything off the bat. So apparently it's because of the Bourbon dynastic influence, military tradition, raw material availability. So the Bourbons, like I said before, their national color was white, their royal color was white. And so when the Bourbons took control of the Spanish throne, well, the rest is history. White, you don't have to dye the uniforms at all, so cheap, the Bourbon colors. Pretty simple. American blue. Possibly one of the more famous colors that armies wore at this time. Now, if you're an American, you may have at some point wondered why blue? Why did Americans choose blue? Once again, economics played a key factor here. As you can see here, according to this military website, our blue dye came from the indigo plant, which was grown in the colonies. So, it once again, cheap option, and it looks good. And apparently, if you read on here in this article here, apparently blue became some sort of patriotic color. This would go on even to the War of 1812. So, we used blue at the beginning because it was a cheap option, and it just sort of became a patriotic color for the American Army, and remained so for quite some time. So, once again, the indigo plant, which was grown in the colonies. I believe it was also grown in the Caribbean. It's kind of a purplish color, the plant itself, but the dye it produces is a really nice, deep blue color. The Dutch wore blue. They didn't wear orange. Orange was apparently an expensive dye, because you had to mix two different colors to get the orange. But they did wear blue. And apparently it's because, once again, easy access to the indigo plant. At least according to my searches from the other day. So, the Dutch had Caribbean colonies, I believe, at this time, and so they could just simply import in indigo. It was a cheap option. So, not that complicated. We could just look down here, apparently citing this Reddit post here, it was widely available, and like I said, because they had access to indigo. Persian blue is a really deep, dark blue. And apparently, it was created in the early 18th century and is the first modern synthetic pigment. According to my Google searches from the other day, it was invented in a lab by accident. And so the Prussians immediately took this synthesized dye, and they quickly began using it to dye their uniforms. Once again, I mean, if you could synthesize your dye, why not use it? It was easy to make and cheap to dye your army's wool uniforms. So that's where the Prussian blue comes from. The Swedes wore blue and yellow, but primarily blue. This blue dye, you may have noticed, is a slightly different shade than Prussian blue, or the blue that the Dutch and the Americans use, which is from the indigo plant. That's because the Swedes got their blue from this plant here, woad. It produces this kind of, I don't know what you would call this, kind of a off-color blue. It is blue, but it's kind of has a slight green or yellow influence in there, just a teeny bit. So it's not a pure blue, but the Swedes used it because it was readily available where they were at. So the Swedes used this dye, woad, as opposed to Prussian blue and indigo blue, which the Americans and the Dutch used. Russian green comes from Peter the Great, and it's very straightforward. The choice of green appears to have been driven by economic and practical considerations. The dye combination of woad blue, same as the Swedes, underdyed with weld yellow, produced a light fast green on-course Russian wool. The color stood up well to the dust and mud of campaign conditions, blah 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 blah. Wood and weld were available from the Baltic domestic cultivation rather than requiring distant imports. So once again, you may have noticed the the theme throughout this entire video here. The color that you used to dye your national uniforms for your armies was almost always the cheapest option. Whichever was cheap, that's what you used. So, British red, the madder root. The American blue, the Dutch blue, the indigo plant. Prussian blue, a synthesized dye. Swedes, woad. Russian, they were able to combine woad and weld to create green. And it was their best options. It was the cheapest thing that they could use. Armies were expensive, so you just cut corners where you could. And that's where the colors for different countries come from. Now, I'm just going to say this for what it's worth. If I sound like I can't talk right now, it's because I can't. I'm not good at actually verbalizing my thoughts out loud. So part of the reason why I'm making these history videos is not just for my own enjoyment and for anybody who might be curious, their enjoyment, is because I can't talk. I can't speak. So, pardon my difficult time actually speaking, but hopefully you found some interest in this video. I certainly found this study to be interesting as well. Like I said, this is just a romp through the internet instead of being an authoritative video essay like my last video was. So anyway, later nerds.